So I want to thank everybody who was able to join us today for this event run by the European Heat Pump Association on how to surf the renovation wave with heat pumps. Really excited. It's a fantastic agenda today. And as we get started on the main event, I wanted to do a little bit of scene setting for you and sharing a little bit of where we are today and where we are going to be heading within the story of heat pumps in Europe. Just quickly before we do that, so you know who it is that you're listening to, I want to introduce myself. My name is Meredith Annex, and I work with BloombergNEF. I'm very excited and honored to be able to work with the EHPA on this event today. BloombergNEF, for those who are unfamiliar with us, we are a third-party market research provider, and we've been active since 2004. We were acquired by Bloomberg in 2009 and provide independent analysis, tools, and data sets regarding the energy transition. And our background was originally in the power sector, but we now cover transformations across the energy and industrial spaces with an eye on decarbonization. I personally sit within our buildings and industry division and lead our analysis on low carbon heating and cooling with an eye on buildings and industrial process heat. The key technologies that we look at are obviously electrification, including heat pumps, as well as green gases like hydrogen and biomethane, as well as district heating. And before that, my background was in gas and power analysis. So as we kick off this event on how to surf the renovation wave, let's take a look at where things are today. 1/3 of building energy demand is currently met by electricity here in Europe. And the share of fossil fuels in building energy consumption has actually fallen 10 percentage points since 2000. Despite this, gas and oil still account for nearly half of the sector's total energy demand. The majority of this fuel is used for space heating and domestic hot water, which together account for 80% of energy demand from buildings. Of course, the role of fossil fuels in space heating varies a lot by country. This is looking at the breakdown of heating units across the housing stock in various regions of Europe and North America. While places like the UK, Netherlands, and Ireland rely heavily on gas or oil heating, some countries rely more on electric sources, including heat pumps and direct electric heating. Others, like Sweden, see a large share of demand being met by district heating. But these district heating networks are not always low carbon. And even in the power sector, fossil fuels continue to contribute to the generation mix. Overall, Europe is doing better than most other regions in the world in terms of its electricity grid's carbon intensity. Only 1/3 of European generation currently comes from fossil fuels. And non-fuel-based generation like wind, hydro, solar, and geothermal account for 35% of the mix. But that's set to change. Every year, BNEF does a long-term analysis of the power system, known as our New Energy Outlook, or NEO. Our latest one was published just about 2 weeks ago. And at its core is our economic transition scenario, which looks at what could happen to the power generation mix based on economics alone, removing pretty much all policy from the equation. This year as well, our New Energy Outlook was expanded to not just look at the power sector, but all energy use, from using trendline analysis to assess direct consumption from buildings, industry, and transport as well. Just sticking with the power sector, our least cost modeling paints a very optimistic picture for grid decarbonization. By 2050, over 80% of European power generation could be fuel-free, with wind and solar accounting for the lion's share of that output. This is due, again, to least cost modeling, so it all comes down to the improved economics for wind and solar generation, even in the absence of policy intervention. One key driver is the fact that wind and solar already represent the cheapest sources of new electricity generation in most of Europe, and indeed in most of the world. This is tipping point number 1 for our analysis, and it has largely been met. The second tipping point occurs when the levelized costs of electricity from new wind and solar generation become cheaper than existing fossil fuel generation. In Germany, we expect the cost of new onshore wind and solar to undercut the running costs of existing coal and gas power plants by the end of the decade. And in China, which still relies heavily on coal generation, we could reach these tipping points even sooner. So this is how we get to a system which becomes 80% from low carbon resources by 2050. Unfortunately, the story is not as rosy when we look at wider building decarbonization. Based on current economic trends, space heating is set to decline in Europe, but this decline is largely offset by rising energy use for hot water and cooking. Similarly, while gas demand declines in Western Europe, this is largely offset by increasing demand for natural gas in Eastern Europe and non-EU member states. Part of the challenge here is that gas is a really cheap source of heating today. These charts are showing you the economics for heat pumps versus gas and oil heating in single-family homes around the world. On the x-axis, you get the lifetime cost over 20 years for a heat pump, and on the y-axis is the fossil fuel alternative. As you can see, and as many of you guys will know from practice, heat pumps compete well economically against oil, even without significant policy intervention. However, they struggle to compete with gas boilers and furnaces in most countries. Over time, this story is set to improve. In the neo-economic transition scenario, we see the upfront cost paid by a homeowner for a heat pump declining 15 to 20% by 2050, depending on the market. These declines come from a maturing manufacturing base for heat pumps, technology improvements, and reduced installation fees. At the same time, heat pumps see rising annual average coefficients of performance. This causes the payback period, or how long it takes a heat pump to save money relative to a gas or oil heating unit, to fall. But in many regions, heat pumps are still not competitive against natural gas until the late 2040s. So what does this mean for heat pump sales? The improved economics has a delayed impact on consumer behavior in our analysis, because consumer behavior is influenced by both economics and imitation effects. As more heat pumps get installed, barriers to individual heat pump adoption, such as awareness, access to trained installers, and so forth, decline. However, challenging economics means that without policy intervention, heat pumps do not begin to significantly displace gas and oil heaters in existing single-family owner-occupied homes until the 2040s. Now, this analysis is based on a policy-agnostic future. Fortunately, the world that we live in is not policy agnostic. And this year saw some truly revolutionary policies for heat pump adoption come into play. Most recently, this includes the renovation wave. The EU's flagship policy for stimulating a 275 billion euro investment per year in building decarbonization. The renovation wave has some explicit and ambitious goals. It wants to see building emissions fall 60% below 1990 levels by 2030, and energy consumption for heating and cooling fall 18% over that same time period. The strategy also aims to double the renovation rate and increase the share of deep renovations, which result in 60% or greater reductions in energy use from buildings. But doubling the renovation rate alone is not enough to hit the energy consumption targets laid out by the EU. Currently, the EU's renovation rate accounts for around 1% of the housing stock per year. At this pace, the heat demand from buildings would fall a mere 3% by 2030 and 7% by 2050, assuming each renovation halved a home's heating demand. Doubling the renovation rate would achieve a 5% reduction in heat demand by 2030, and even tripling it would fall short of the EU strategy's goals. So to achieve the 18% heat demand reduction target set forth by the renovation wave, the EU must switch to more efficient low carbon heating units like heat pumps. And towards this, the EU renovation wave sets another goal, that 4% of buildings each year should switch to low carbon heating sources like heat pumps or district heating by 2030. Reaching that target would require about 8.6 million low carbon heating units to be sold a year. This is over 8 times more than the number of heat pumps sold in 2019 in Europe, although of course not all of those 8.6 million will be heat pumps. And it is also in line with the number of heating units replaced in a given year. So we could see most heating units sold by 2026 being entirely from low carbon heating unit sources. Now, these are targets and they are the focus of a lot of the presentations for today. But whether they'll be hit and what we actually see will be in the details of the policy and the funding. Regulatory mechanisms like mandatory minimum performance standards for energy is a key step. But we also need incentives like grants, loans, and tax credits. Currently, the renovation wave is very focused on looking at operational subsidies, such as including the EU ETS, heating it within the EU ETS. And this is an important step to help make heat pumps more cost competitive against gas and oil. Unfortunately, from our analysis, it does not sufficiently add to the costs of gas and oil enough to make heat pumps competitive in most European markets on its own. I look forward to discussing this more during the first panel of today's event. But to give you a little bit of a sense of what comes in the panels after, another way that you can increase heat pump adoption is through business model innovation. This is the focus of the second panel today. The majority of heat pumps sold currently are through direct purchase by individual homeowners or property developers, most often. Yet a number of players are looking to provide financing solutions for heat pumps that reduce the upfront cost to consumers. The success of these business models, for instance, this slide is showing you a business model set forth by Dandelion in the US, often hinges on heat pumps leading to lower energy bills. As such, they are better suited to ground source heat pumps or to markets with particularly low retail electricity tariffs today. And of course, another popular business framework is the as-a-service model, which could include financing terms or O&M contracting, or tying heat pumps in with other demand-side solutions like rooftop solar, storage, electric vehicles, or smart home devices. All of these innovations could serve to boost adoption, either by reducing economic entry barriers or by improving the value to end users. And finally, I want to bring us full circle and back to the start of my presentation, which is to say that additional heat pump adoption can actually help the electricity grid to decarbonize faster. So earlier this year, although it feels like an age ago because it was before the current coronavirus pandemic that we're all living through, BloombergNEF did a study with Eaton and Statkraft that was looking at sector coupling within Europe as a tool for decarbonization. And this report found a significant opportunity for the electrification of buildings by replacing oil and gas heating units in Northwest Europe. This in turn would significantly impact the grid, particularly by adding demand in winter months. Just how big the impact that of this electrification was on peak power demand depends on how much the new electricity consumption is flexible. For instance, homes that can participate in load shifting activities, the impact on peak demand can be reduced and consumption can coincide with the hours of higher renewable energy output. So with flexible sector coupling, you can actually increase the share of total generation and capacity that is met through non-dispatchable sources like wind and solar. This topic is going to be touched on the final panel of today's event, which is hosted by my colleague, Emma Champion, who is a lead author of this report. So I hope this presentation has painted a bit of the picture of where we're going today, where we are today, and what we'll be discussing over the course of the agenda for today's event. And without further ado, I would like to hand back over to Thomas Nowak to kick us off.
Well, thank you very much, Meredith. That was beautiful. And you did it much better than I could have. You went over the whole conference. So you have actually, I think you hinted to some summaries. Very good, but we will look at policy in the first place. So let me stress a bit more what is happening. As you said, you have a policy agnostic scenario, which I would dare to say, if I may nasty, it's a bit insufficient in terms of ambition. Luckily, we have representatives here with us today that represent more ambition. And the European Parliament has just voted on a CO2 emission reduction target of 60%. The Commission is looking at 55%. The member states, the German lender, have just told the German government, hey guys, you have to also go for 60%. So we see quite some momentum for more ambition. The Commission itself has presented a document, the Energy System Integration Strategy, where it says by 2030, we want 40% of all buildings, and mind you, roughly we have about 120 million buildings in Europe. 40% of these buildings should be heated by electricity. So if I look at your numbers and if I look at this ambition level, there is a huge gap that we have to fill. And I think that's where policymakers come into play, because when I discuss with my members, they tell me, hey, we can produce the numbers that you need, the numbers for the heat pumps that we need by 2030 with our manufacturing capacities. What else did I write down? The renovation strategy communication is a very important piece that will also up skip upwards the expectation that we can have from your numbers, because it has said that we should renovate the 35 million least performing buildings. And these are the buildings that are typically not seen as fit for purpose from heat pumps. So if they are now all of a sudden coming into the game as application areas, then we have a huge additional potential. So if we add, and now this doesn't really add up, but 40% of 120 million, that's roughly 48 million, plus 35 million from the bottom. You know, we are exceeding 80 million that are potentially in line with what heat pumps can do. So we have a very optimistic situation. We have the climate law on top. We have the whole discussion about a revision of the existing clean energy for all package that has been named. But let's not talk about what we think. Let's also hear what the policymakers think that we have today with us. We are talking to Michael Bloss with us. We have Pernille Weiss, and we have Patrick Crombez from the industry side. So Michael, I should say, right? I'm completely confused. Sorry for that. So Michael Bloss is an MEP for the group of the Greens and the European Free Alliance, and Pernille Weiss is an MEP for the group of the EPP, the Christian Democrats. Thank you for joining us. Pernille is from Denmark. Michael is from Germany, both countries that are claiming and are doing the energy transition on a large scale. So I would be very interested to hear your opinion. And we have done a short preparation, of course, of all of this. So we wanted to start with Michael. You have been one of the prominent figures in voting for a 60% CO2 emission reduction target. And now we see that the existing clean energy for all packages is actually suffering in many instances when it comes to its implementation on the member state level. Do you think that an ambitious parliament can actually push this through down to the end user, to people like you and me that have to do the work in the end?
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you for this interesting presentation, this interesting report. I think it's very important that we now go really deep into discussion how to implement our ambition, and we see there is a lot of things to do. Just maybe as the beginning, it's in the European Parliament, we voted on this ambitious goals, minus 60%. We do that because we have the climate crisis currently at hand. Actually, Greens wanted to go even further, minus 65%. That would have been what we thought in line with the 1.5 degree temperature goal. And maybe another positive side, it's not only the German Länder, it's actually countries like Denmark that also call for such ambitious goals on the European level. Denmark also minus 65. We have Finland calling for more ambitious goals. So there is, I believe, a dynamic that can us, and it will bring us to really ambitious goals that we then have to implement. And yeah, so the question is how, and as you already pointed out, it needs policy intervention, and policy intervention will be there. That is also the bigger idea of the Green Deal. We now decide on the climate goals as the orientation point, and then in a bigger wave of legislation coming this summer, we will reform a lot of European energy and climate policy. So as you said, it is a big challenge, and I think that's what it is. We need all hands on deck. We need to connect also the dots. We have the renovation wave, the system integration strategy, the industrial strategy, and all of these strategies now need to become actually laws, and need to change things. So in order for these ideas to really arrive at the citizen and in the market. So I believe there's some key important things that we have to look at. As you were mentioning, we will also reform the minimum energy performance standards for all types of buildings, and there we need to have this clear rules, this clear minimum performance standards. We also fought as Greens Kieran, actually, my colleague in the ITRE committee, for this deep energy efficiency rules, the energy efficiency first principle, the in municipalities, deep renovation. I think that's also important to look really at the municipalities as a whole. Then I believe what is important is to picture this not only as a possibility to save CO2, but it's also, and it's quite important for the time to come, a way to support our industry in Europe. We want to have industry in Europe. We want to have manufacturing in Europe. That's the backbone of the European economy that also always saves us from like big financial crisis, for instance. And in the industrial strategy that I'm also working on, I was pushing for all types of renewable energies, also heat pumps, to be at the center. It's not own well. There is a lot of hype about hydrogen, but we know for the building stock for heat, we need actually to have to focus on the energy efficiency first principle, on the renewables, and that's then the heat pumps. So there is this is a place where we need to get our priorities right. It's not hydrogen that will save us. It is actually the renewables and the heat pumps that will here save us. And it's also important that we support it. I have been fighting for also in the Invest EU file, so for the funding, for a dedicated funding window for energy efficiency and for the renovation wave. Unfortunately, I've lost this battle, but I think there's still places to see that this there's really money dedicated to it. Also, when we now look into the implementation of the next generation EU funding of the of this, is all of this is implemented on the national level as well. Unfortunately, we have not been able to set this clear conditionalities on the European level, but on the national level it can be done. And I think this is also some place where we need to look into. And well, I think the most important message that I give you is, yes, you're right. We have ambitious goals. We need to now implement them. The policy debate is starting. It's, I think, the high time in summer next year to get it right. But also the important thing is to start right now. The money that we spend now on the recovery is, I think, the biggest amount that we will spend in the next 10 years. So to program this right is is really key, and it goes into, for instance, the renovation, into heat pumps, and the decarbonization of the building stock. So this is the ideas that we're thinking about. And then, of course, it's the question about the price of CO2, because we currently know, at least in Germany, 1 ton of CO2 is costing the society as a whole 180 euros. And so, and if we would have functioning markets, then there would be a price for CO2 in this direction.
I have to laugh because what I think we have in 10 minutes already outlined what we could discuss for a whole summer school of more than 3 weeks, and I guess it will be with us for the next year or two. I wanted to pick up on some of the things that you mentioned when it comes to industry and lead over. I think that is a very good starting point for Patrick Crombez. You are representing one of the major European heat pump manufacturers with factories in Europe. So you are the the party that will provide employment in Europe. But are you ready? Would you say that you can fulfill this ambition that the policymakers have outlined, or are you more in line with Meredith and we do a bit of a policy ambition agnostic business as usual? What can you do, Patrick?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Thomas. Thanks also, Meredith and Michael, for the extremely interesting presentation that I think you made, and the comments that were raised on that. From an industry point of view, the basic comment is indeed, yes, it's about the implementation. How can we implement the targets? How can we make sure that what we want to do, what we need to do, is actually happening? As an industry itself, purely from a technology point of view, I would even go further than what Thomas would say, that heat pumps today are able to basically heat or cool pretty much most of the buildings that are out there, or you really would have a very strange building. So technology is not the issue anymore. It's really much more about how to make it happen and what are then the barriers for it not to happen. And if we tackle those one by one, maybe we can raise a picture. And there was a point made very rightly by Michael about the carbon cost, the carbon intensity of the energies that we are using, which play a crucial role. If you just compare gas to electricity prices across Europe, and there's a quite clear correlation between the difference in that prices and the penetration of heat pumps in the market. There's no two ways about that, and Meredith actually showed that in her slides, and we can all think of the examples that are there. So there's a very clear leverage there, of course, which is as such not costing anything to the taxpayer, but it's really just clarifying and creating a level playing field for different technologies of heating or cooling our premises. Industrialization is a factor we need to work on, but that's what the industry is doing. I think if demand is there, industry is following. That's what industry has been doing for the last 200 years, and I don't see any reason why that would not continue. The whole point is indeed, I think there's a valid concern potentially about the European aspect of that. Europe is a manufacturing base and has been the cradle, I think, of I would just call it hydronic heating for the world. And there's absolutely no reason why that would not be the case for heat pumps. In Europe, we have, I think, different expectations from our heating systems than anywhere else in the world, which basically creates a unique demand, which needs to be met and is currently being met more and more by products that are designed, that are manufactured in Europe. From an end user point of view, that's the case, but also from a regulation point, that's the case. Europe has taken the lead very early on in creating efficiency standards for products, in creating sound standards for products, and in the future will create requirements towards connecting and smart use of equipment, which all are creating unique demands that are raising the technological standard of the European heat pumps, and it sets them apart from what is being potentially produced elsewhere in the world. So I think that's really something that we as an industry are very much in favor for, and that allows us to produce these units in Europe for the European market. I think it's a very crucial element that sets us apart, and which again can create I would say a European standard of products that in the past has applied for the existing heating technology and has been spread around the world. And I think in the future can apply also for, I would then call it the new heating technology, which is on board the heat pumps, which can also be applied again throughout the world. So Europe can take the lead, the Europe industry can take the lead, as long as indeed we actually create the field to the market to roll them out. So that's, I think, the discussion we are having. Carbon is a very important element on that, as I said before, and maybe over time we need to start thinking not only about efficiency labels or efficiency targets for units, for products and for buildings, but maybe you need to start thinking about carbon targets for products or carbon targets for buildings, which will actually make it more visible of what people are choosing and why they are choosing and what is their contribution they can do towards reaching the carbon targets. Thank you.
This is a very interesting point, since also the European Parliament has introduced this idea of a carbon budget for Europe. Again, I think that is a discussion in its own right, but it should at least be mentioned that the concept has been touched upon. This whole thing, what we're discussing, happens inside an energy transition that is driven largely by younger people. We see Fridays for Future, we see Greta Thunberg, Scandinavians, but young people across the world. It struck me when we prepared this that in Pernille's communication, there is this idea, more an ethical discussion of a generational pact. And I thought it would be an interesting question to ask you, if we go from this ethical perspective to a down-to-earth perspective, the young people asking parents, take responsibility, and the parents are managers and decision makers and teachers and so on. How would you translate this idea of a generational pact in the context of greening the building stock?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very important question that goes exactly to my heart as the carpenter's daughter. from Denmark, the country with the 2030 target ambition of 70%, but also as the mother of a carpenter myself, and after 12 years of experience in the building industry, where I have been working with the evidence-based design processes as a tool of how to assess either your new building or most often the existing buildings, and how to create more value for the end users, especially also seen from a sustainability and energy consumption perspective. I am so happy to be here. That's my way of surfing into this this afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. Well, the generation contract is actually the core essence of how to be at least what you can say a Danish conservative, and how you can say what it is, the raison d'etre of being an EPP. Because what we do now, us that are adults and alive and active, is that we provide for the next generation to take over. Also in the framework of what we met when we took over from our grandparents, the world that they gave us. And that's a very serious obligation to always think of how can we do everything in our daily lives, and also in the broader perspective, in a way that makes the world a little bit more better. If I die tomorrow, will my children then say, okay, mother contributed with doing a little bit more better than she had the world handled over by my mom and dad? So that's the ethics of the generation contract. To this specific question regarding heat pumps and the renovation wave, I would say that it's a question of how to make the renovation wave as meaningful and as coherent to the other challenges that we are facing right now, in parallel with the climate transition. Because before the COVID, we thought that besides from trade wars and migration pressure, the climate challenge was the pivotal of all, and it still is, in my view. But now we also have to combat the damages and the challenges to our economy and our society that COVID has given us, and that COVID also have learned us in the way to change our behavioral and our daily life structures in the future because of this pandemic. And what I see when I see the renovation wave and the surfing potential for the climate transition and the generation contract in the framework of the Corona crisis, it is that from every €1 million spent on energy efficiency of the building stock, including, of course, as a core part of it, the installation of heat pumps and also the renovation of heat pumps, we create about 18 to 19 jobs. Within the next 9 years, there is the ambition from the Commission side that we can actually create 160,000 new jobs from the renovation wave. And we need that very much as a part of the generation contract, where we tell our young generation, and also we tell the mom and dads out there who lost their jobs because of COVID in one sector, that there are a future. There is jobs to be created for them in the framework of the renovation wave.
Yeah, I find that that is an interesting aspect that would lead me to a question to Meredith. I had a different one written down, but I think now I would like to ask that in a different manner. If you say that this is very important to create these jobs, and we know that they are going to be created, and by the way, I think carpenters can make great surfboards, so they will also benefit.
Because that it gives hope, that gives energy. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I think I cut you off out of a technical aspect. Do you want to finish again? The last thing that we heard was it gives hope.
Well, I thank you, Thomas. I interpreted your interruption as if you think that now I have talked too much and too long. So now you will make this a sophisticated way of cutting me off, and that's okay for me. let's just continue. I have some other points. We can take that in the debate concerning what is actually needed for the toolboxes for how to implement, because ambitions is okay. It's important to be ambitious, but if we do not know how to equip the toolbox of how to renovate, assess the existing building stock, give guidance to building stock owners, tenants, the incentives between tenants and building stock owners, the SMEs, also who needs guidance and best practices and how to actually understand what can be done if we take the building stock, the assessment, and the financial tools. How do we create either a deep stage or a stage renovation that also is meaningful for the next generation, so that what mom and dad or my building stock owner is doing with my building actually is creating as best possible value to the climate. That explanation must always be easy to find in the upcoming years of the renovation wave. Otherwise, we will lose the acceptance and the trust from the next generation if our language on a renovation wave and all the technologies here, especially also, of course, the heat pump logic, then we will fail on that. And then the young generation with their little sisters and brothers, they will again go to the streets and demonstrate because they do not understand what on earth are we doing, because it seems like, well, we don't know ourselves. And for me, it comes down to evidence, design, and to financial tools, which are both green mortgages, it's scrubbing schemes, it's incentives in how to finance a deep renovation without making homes and offices unaffordable for small SMEs and for normal family economies. That what I would like to say if I was allowed, and I hear. So now I will hand my word over to you again, Thomas. Thank you so much.
No, you're perfectly allowed. I'm sorry. I really I didn't hear you anymore. So I thought, and the picture disappeared. So I thought you were done. I did not mean to interrupt you, not at all. I think actually what you said is very helpful to the discussion. This one-stop shopping idea, this idea of making it easy for end users to decide in the right direction. I heard from Michael and from Patrick that the idea of a CO2 price could be interesting. So I would like to bring that back as a guiding tool, because you also said we need to help the decision makers. That includes the children, because if you build a new house and you have children, you ask them yourself, so what would be the impact of a CO2 pricing? And that is actually to both of you, Pernille and Michael, how realistic do you think this is going to be? We are discussing at the moment rather in sophisticated areas and not down to earth of a real change of the market system. And
exactly. Can I begin?
Yes, and then we would do Michael, and then I would like to hear Meredith, what is your system integrating such a thought? And then exactly. Patrick has brought it up actually.
Yeah, and it's a relevant question because it still is there as a part of the discourse and the debate, and seen from my both professional before I became a full-time politician point of view, but also in respect to people who know much more about the logic of the ETS system and the building stock, then the warning is that if we introduce the building stock to the ETS, then actually all the concrete incentives that is the way we decarbonize our building stock and also provide the amount of jobs that can actually be harvested from the renovation wave, as well as also if we have the building in the ETS, then maybe the incentives to actually renovate will not be there as much as they could be and must be, because it creates jobs, but also because it creates healthier and more social, sustainable living environments and local districts. So I'm not a fan of, and I can say that's the position of the EPP. We are not actually in fan of including the building stock into the ETS, not because we are not ambitious, but just because we know already what to do. in the building stock to make it decarbonize and create jobs and more healthy buildings. And we will not have those values created if we include the building stock in the ETS.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, I can share the skepticism of Pernille here, but it was interesting. Meredith said before that that it's a question of competitiveness, and as long as the price for oil is so cheap, and it does not include the cost it actually creates on the society, of course, heat pumps will not be competitive. So the question is really, how do we solve that in a way that we create a market, or we create the conditions for the market that that make the technologies that are future-proof, cheaper, or cost competitive. The ETS as like a full merger would definitely not work on this, because we have different prices there. So we are against this. You said policy intervention is important. So this policy intervention in terms of, for instance, minimum standards, I think it's important. What we try in the climate law is, as you said, we create this greenhouse gas budget as an overall budget that gives also an investment stability. How much can we still emit? Everyone should know that, who makes an investment now. So for instance, now if there's a lot of talk to use gas as a bridging tool, maybe hydrogen. And I think if we create a stable kind of framework, it becomes clear that that we have to be much faster. So that means we as the policy world have to introduce measures that that leapfrog all of this and then go straight into the technologies that work in a decarbonized world. And that's then the heat pumps. So it's clear, if I would be able to to have a wish for Christmas, then I would say, let's introduce on the European level a CO2 tax. Unfortunately, the tax is difficult on the European level because of the competency issues. We see that there is difficulties to bring that into the ETS. It would not work. And what we need to have now on the table is things that work. And therefore, yeah, the price is important, but we must not forget about the other instruments that we have, for instance, regulations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we are running out of time a little bit. I wanted to give the opportunity to Meredith to comment on this. How do you see this pricing issue inside your modeling?
Absolutely. Look, I think we would agree that the price that you have to hit in a carbon market in order to make heat pumps competitive, especially against natural gas, is very high. If we were to put in that 180 euro per ton number, which Michael listed earlier as the impact that carbon has on society, if we could hit that, we would be fine. We think that 110 euro per ton carbon price is enough to make heat pumps competitive in Germany, which is one of the least competitive markets from heat pumps today versus natural gas. But these are high carbon prices. And the thing to think about when you're adding buildings into the EU ETS, does it create a level playing field? Yes, absolutely. And that's an important first step. But if you're talking about a 30 or a 60 euro per ton carbon price, most likely what you're doing is you're having end users consume that and absorb that on their bills rather than driving further adoption of heat pumps. And that's because despite all of the talk of energy efficiency being one of the negative cost sources for carbon abatement, it is likely to be one of the last sources to move forward. There are other industries that will be providing abatement first before buildings do within an EU ETS system. That means that we have to look at the other barriers besides just increasing gas and oil to make them more competitive with electricity. We should be looking at removing the upfront cost barriers to heat pumps, making heat pumps cheaper to purchase upfront so that it takes less of your savings in order to adopt them. We should be looking to have more trained installers. We're already seeing in the UK this becoming a potential barrier to the implementation of some of the UK's goals. And we should also be looking at the way that we tax the energy system as well. Right now, one of the biggest reasons why electricity retail prices are so high is because of the way we pass through the taxes to end user bills. A lot of those are going through onto electricity bills, for instance, in Germany, in the UK, and Denmark. If you removed those or reduced those and reapportioned them to other areas of consumption, you could easily improve the economics of heat pumps today without even thinking about a carbon price. And then, of course, there's the regulatory factors as well that we were talking about. And I think in buildings, especially if you want to keep in mind the societal impacts, that's going to be quite key.
That leads me to a last round of comments, and that I would like to connect these two. If you say societal impacts, I think there is one thing that we need to do, that is connecting social policy and energy policy, or actually disconnecting it, because I hear too often that people say we can't afford to make energy efficiency measures economically attractive, because then the energy poor people can't afford their heating anymore. And I think there we need to disconnect and say the energy policy needs to do energy policy, and the social policy needs to help the social people that would otherwise suffer. But my question would be to give you all a bit of an opening and some fill the last minutes of this conversation meaningfully, to both Patrick, Pernille, and Michael. If you could choose, and Michael, you have given already a wish for Christmas, but if you let's see what Meredith just said. We have to look at taxation. So if you would have one wish free, would it either be, yes, we have to rearrange the burden on taxation, electricity versus fossil fuels, or do you have something else that you want to wish instead? And then I'm afraid in the matter of time, we have to close. And as I said in the beginning, we probably could discuss this for 2 weeks. But maybe we go around the tiles of my screen. So Patrick, and then Pernille and Michael.
Okay. I would very much agree with the taxation issue. Ultimately, I think an industry or a technology has to stand by itself. And as an industry person, I would think we can do that as long as the level playing field is there. And that's not the case today. So energy prices are not treated in the same way. If that would already be the case, I'm pretty sure a lot of the issues would already start to disappear over time. Just want to pick up on what Meredith was saying about, indeed, installation issues, which over time also will probably reduce and will also contribute to making heat pumps more attractive. Because that's indeed a matter of fair competition into the market and training, which is our responsibility as a manufacturer, to make sure that these units are easier to install, are as easy to install as today a boiler is to install, taking into account that also on that side, trajectory happened over time to make sure that they are to be installed in one day, where I think a few years back, probably it took them 2 or 3 days to install them. So this is happening. And I would just like to end with one comment, and picking up on what Pernille was saying, it's indeed there is a societal impact. And there is one thing that I'm personally quite concerned about, is indeed with the funding that is now coming available, and what we see happening in how the funds potentially are already allocated into certain countries, is to avoid that we are funding technology that in 5 years' time, again, we have to replace, because that will indeed be very difficult to explain. So the danger of today sponsoring or subsidizing fossil fuel technology, which in 5 or 10 years, again, you have to replace before the end of life, is a crucial element that I believe very much, if we decide today, we can tackle that. Thank you.
Thank you. Pernille.
My one wish for Christmas. If I should be very original, but also like the child asking the Santa and knowing that Santa is also obliged to the generation contract, I would very much wish that we could create this optimum equation of how to tackle the specific barriers in every kind of building stock. Typologies are not the same all over Europe. But also to combine it with the bits and pieces in this equation of the renovation wave concerning different sources of finance. Because there's a lot. It's almost like building a house up from the ground, because it takes tiles, windows, wires, glass. There are so many bits and pieces to the equation of relevant and an optimal renovation projects. And I think we should wish for this a kind of equation, or kind of a jukebox, where you can put in all all the knowledge that you have, and then the address of your building, and then you just pull on a string, and then boom, you get the plan and the finance and the process, and then you can go ahead. We need that again, the toolbox. So I wish for the toolbox.
And a great song to it too.
Yeah, you can try.
Like a jukebox. Michael.
I already said my wish, but maybe the wish can also be that we first stop subsidizing fossil fuels. That could be like a beginning, and maybe not to wish too high. I think that one thing that we did not speak so much about, but is really important, especially where I come from, because this is one of the bottlenecks, is the skills agenda, and having the people to renovate the houses. This is something that in Baden-Württemberg, where Greens are heading the government, one of the biggest struggle actually for going further in our attempts to also, for instance, renovate the building stock of our state. Yeah, and then I wish everyone and all of you that you stay healthy. That's, I think, very important right now.
Thank you very much. We see other people coming in. So Meredith, you have done such a tremendously great opening. I leave you also to close this session, please, for this short wish of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess my wish would be that we see the incentives come in soon. You know, we don't have to have the policy framework that is strong enough for 2050 today, but we need something that's strong enough for 2025 and 2030. In the last month, 2 months, 3 months, we've seen an incredible number of targets come into place. We've seen the vision of where the heating sector is heading come forward by a number of different countries, but we're still lacking today any type of guidance that would help the industry to begin to scale and begin to act. And that's what we need to do in order to get to this situation where the industry can stand on its own 2 feet. As Patrick said, I do believe that it can. We just need to give the first push and the first indications of where that direction is.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of you. I'm absolutely aware that I have probably not given all of you enough space, and it's I guess more or less even a one-on-one discussion would not have been enough for 40 minutes for the broadness of the topic. But this is a good start. It's a process that can continue, and I'm very happy to discuss this in the future with all of you in different configurations. Thank you very much.